This is House Planning Help Episode 3.
Have you always wanted to build your dream home? Maybe you know what you want. But what if it could be better? HousePlanningHelp.com. Speaking to the experts, searching for better ways, planning for the future, build a better home. HousePlanningHelp.com podcast.
Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and in this session, I'm starting a mini-series on the Passive House Standard. Pat Wilkinson from Touchwood Homes is my guest. He's recently been part of a team that's built the world's most airtight home, or that is what we think, unless you know otherwise. And if you're starting out on your career as an architect or a builder or a designer, getting into the trade somewhere, and you're keen to look at better ways of doing things, I want to connect you with some great minds. All that to come.
HousePlanningHelp.com.
Welcome to episode 3, and I have to say that I feel I'm progressing well. We are moving along nicely. We had an episode on energy efficiency last week, and we're looking at a particular standard, the Passive House Standard, today. But what I like about it is it just seems like common sense. And so when I build my house, or if I do a retrofit project, I know energy efficiency will be at the forefront of my mind, because to me, is common sense is what we should all be doing, and we shouldn't really be tackling any projects unless we're taking advantage of what is available. So we're looking into the Passive House Standard today. I did wonder what to tell you beforehand, before we have our chat with Pat, but I've got this brochure from the Passive House Trust, and it's really good. I wondered about reading you some bits from it, but I know that all this information's on their website and it's very good. So we'll put a link to their website in the show notes and you can go and have a look for yourself. But I could give you all the technical explanation, but I think it's better that it just unfolds naturally. One thing I did do, I thought it would be interesting to phone an estate agent to find out whether a passive house has more value, because of course you'll be saving a lot of energy, and energy equals money. So I phoned up one of my local estate agents and they completely blanked me. Just Passive House, I think they thought it was a wind-up to begin with. Passive House Standard, what's that, mate? And then 2 seconds later I was on hold, going to speak to a colleague, and then I spoke to the colleague, exactly the same thing happened, went on to the third person. They were still none the wiser. So it got me, I don't know, perhaps sidetracked a little bit, that I went to a couple of other, 10 actually, 10 estate agents, just finding out whether there were any Passive House Standard properties on the market. 8 out of the 10 people that I spoke to, again, were completely in the dark. This is people in the industry. It's amazing. And perhaps more amazing to me is that nobody is going shopping for houses, big job, a lot of money at stake here, shopping for houses thinking, what is the energy rating for this house, or how much money can I save? Wouldn't that be a question that you want to ask? I know every time that I go and get a car, I buy it with miles per gallon in mind, because I want to know that it's going to do 60 or 70 miles per gallon, or whatever the latest figure is that it will go to. I want the best at that specific moment. But I just thought that was really odd. There were 2 people that had heard of the Passive House Standard. One of them had been in a networking meeting that morning and had met an architect who'd told him all about it. So that was a bit freaky. And then there was one guy up in, whereabouts was it? I think it was Joel at Middleton's, somewhere in Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire area of the UK. And he had one Passive House Standard property on his books. He did say to me that people that build these houses generally don't want to leave them. So you've gone through all of that, and that's why there aren't many on the market. But it does seem like there's a gap here for a home that's going to be energy efficient and will save you money, even if the initial investment is going to be more. So let's get to the interview. We'll see what we can glean here. We're chatting to Pat from Touchwood Homes. Now, they create bespoke timber frame houses built to the Passive House Standard. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he's recently been part of this project, which has recorded the UK's best air tightness result. There was an article in the Architect's Journal which said it could be in the world. I don't know, I'm not going to go into that debate, but I'll link to that in the show notes too, so that you can go and have a look and a read of it as well. Unfortunately, I recorded this interview before it was all certified and they'd carried out the test, so we don't mention it in the interview. But just imagine that Pat is that man. He's done it many, many times, and he's very knowledgeable.
HousePlanningHelp.com. The interview.
So today we're having a chat with Pat Wilkinson from Touchwood Homes. Hello.
Hello.
And my first question is all about how you got going. What has led you to where you are today?
Well, I've been in construction ever since I started work virtually. building boats actually initially when I was 16, I think. And then I went to work with my father and my uncle in construction. They were partners who had taken over from my grandfather, who started the company in 1920-ish. After a while, my uncle and father both retired. So my brothers and myself took over as Wilkinson Brothers. And we carried on doing extensions and all sorts of things, various maintenance. Then they went their own way, really, because they were doing more plant hire and things like that, which I wasn't interested in particularly. Carried on in the building line. And it seemed an obvious way forward because of our interest in the climate and the planet and nature and ecology. It seemed obvious that we had to produce houses which were more energy efficient, because that was obviously the cause of all our climatic problems.
How have you developed to the current levels of Passivhaus? What has got you there? Why did you start thinking along those lines? You've mentioned ecology and environment, but why doesn't everyone think along those lines?
Well, I don't know. It defies comprehension, in my view. In 1994, I had an architect who I did lots of work for. He approached me with a client who wanted to build a pretty energy-efficient house. He wanted to do it traditional brick and block with lots of insulation in the walls, and I found a way of making it too expensive for him so that I could use my techniques, if you like, using the new, to us, I-beams imported from Sweden, which were only just coming into the country, so that we could build a thicker wall without using lots of timber. And this is where it started, and I got the client to accept this build method. And so we built the house to very unheard of energy efficiency levels. There was no heating in the house, except for a small bit of electric underfloor heating in his bathroom, where he seemed to think he wanted it slightly warmer. But the rest of the house, there was no heating, except for some small amount of heat into the ventilation system, which again was an unheard of technology then.
So you were a pioneer, one of the early guys. What year are we talking about?
This was 1996 when the house was finished, and since then the house has been performing exceedingly well. I've seen the clients, the occupiers now, and they're very happy with it. The children have done projects at school on this house, and they've used hardly any energy at all in the last 15 years. It's just an amazing thing why everybody doesn't build this way and why they didn't then. I'm only an ordinary builder, and I can see the sense and the necessity of building this way. In fact, Mark Prisk, our local MP, he's now chair of the Green Construction Board. He's just starting that up. And I emailed him this last week, and I was talking to his cohort who's also working on the project. And they don't seem to understand that we can build in this energy efficient way now. It's just that the lobbyists, Barratt Homes, Persimmons and the other large companies just want to build as they always have done and still make a vast profit.
Is that what it is? That they will have to pay more money for this construction?
Yes, and they make less profit. And they don't understand it either. I mean, that's a problem. They've got no interest in the technology, if you like. They've always built brick and block with a minute amount of insulation, and that's all they're interested in. They don't want to change because change costs them money, and they've got to teach their contractors how to build in this new way, and they're not prepared to do it. I don't think they are anyway. They'll put a solar panel on a roof somewhere, which probably doesn't work because nobody's set it up right and they don't understand it, but it gives a visual impression of a green house. And they've got no interest in it at all.
What about the key components then? If we're building one of these houses, I know we could go into great detail, but just an overview at this stage.
Insulation and airtightness are the most important features of any energy efficient house. If you can make it airtight so that you're not losing heat through drafts and gaps around windows and things like that, that is so important. But then as a result of that, you've got to have a ventilation system, which is not too onerous. It's just built into the house as you build it, so that you've got good fresh air supply, keeping the air fresh and clean and dry so you don't get condensation and pollen build-ups and allergic problems.
So we've got a ventilation system and also we've got the insulation.
Yes, you've got insulation and you've got the air tightness. With the amount of insulation that we put in, and have been for 15 years, we've got a foot thick in the walls, 300 mil of insulation in the walls and 400 in the roof. And that completely holds in nearly all the heat you have in the house. It just can't escape. And it works conversely in the summer, of course. It keeps it cool in the summer and stops it overheating. When you get a lot of sun shining through the windows, it won't overheat because you've designed your house correctly so that you don't have any too much solar gain through the windows with shading over the outside and proper design. It's all part of the design package which you have to work out. With Passivhaus, you've got a whole spreadsheet, a whole lot of parameters to build within to make sure the house does perform correctly and doesn't overheat as much as a problem of underheating, being cold.
I have always been a fan of some of the traditional eras and historical designs. Does that pose any problem if I wanted to create something that was in a Georgian style or was it?
You can build an energy efficient house to look like whatever you want it to look like. It can look like an old barn, it could look like a stone cottage, it can look like a thatched Tudor hovel if you want. It doesn't make any difference. We can build an energy efficient house to any design.
It comes back to this point again. I don't understand why more isn't happening. What about existing houses that are out there? Is it very costly to convert them?
That is the bigger problem, because you've got 20, 30 million houses out there which are all energy inefficient. And to improve them or to make them as good as a passive house is very, very difficult. There's levels of performance you can get to without spending too much money, but to make it 100%, well, to get to Passivhaus would cost about £40,000-50,000, I would have thought, on an ordinary terraced Victorian house, which is what I worked out for my son who lives in a Victorian terraced house. And I said to get that to an energy efficient state would cost you about £45,000, which is a lot of money for somebody to invest in their property. If they're going to likely to move on in 10 years' time, they haven't got their money back.
When you come to sell these properties, do they gain any value because they have been built in such a way that it will save you money?
Well, this is the point of conjecture. I think we're on the cusp of where it is going to have an effect because energy is becoming so expensive. I was talking to an estate agent a few weeks ago, and he said it doesn't make any difference. There's no uplift in the price at all for an energy efficient house. But I have a feeling that it's going to start having an effect fairly soon. Because it's got to, because it saves you money. And it's obvious if you're going to save money in the future, you're going to pay a little bit more for it perhaps. And people want to buy those sorts of houses. It just makes sense.
How is business for you? Are you finding increasing demand or is it quite static?
It's burgeoning actually at the present minute. We're getting people ringing up all the time, or emailing rather. And everybody's becoming interested. It's just that there's a shortage of money out there and people with sufficient money to buy any house. The whole housing situation is so static and nothing happening because of everybody's frightened of the financial situation we're in. But yes, our business is burgeoning.
Let's change the subject slightly and move to British buildings on the whole. One of the key reasons that I got involved is because I look around some of our historic towns, and I moved to a historic town for a reason because I liked it. And a lot of the new builds don't seem to complement it or have no integration. And I must admit, I'm slightly suspicious how they've been built, whether they've been built well. Would I be right in thinking any of this?
Well, I'm a modernist, if you like, as far as architecture goes. I mean, you look at old towns and people love the old towns, but then to put in a pastiche Tudor house that we've built today in the middle of a Tudor street would look stupid in my view. We should have modern architecture in that street or whatever we're building because we live in the 21st century. We don't want pastiche of Georgian and Victorian and Tudor houses. Why would we? We live in the 21st century. Modern architecture is good. And we made that mistake, I think, in previous eras where we've built houses, try to make them fit. Even when the arts and crafts movement was brought in, you see these arts and craft houses, they're built with interest in the craftsmanship, but it's still copies very often of Tudor, and it looks wrong and out of place because they're not Tudor. And they're built in the 20s, so we should be proud of our modern architecture, I think, and build modern contemporary houses.
For me, though, I don't get the same feeling. I mean, this is probably a wider debate. That when I was away in Oxfordshire and went into some of those lovely Cotswolds villages, and I just got a good feeling inside. This may be the difference between me and I can't embrace that. I don't mind the modern architecture, but it has to have a good feeling about it, and a lot of it doesn't. Maybe that's more my point.
A lot of it is proportion, I think. They do fit certain proportional geometric ideas in your head, I think. Because I look at Cotswold villages and think, that's beautiful. I wouldn't want to live in one, though, because they're so cold, they're miserable, they're cramped, the rooms are so small. And who wants to live in those? I wouldn't.
I would.
Would you?
Yeah, I would.
Well,
it's the difference between two people, of course, I understand that.
I lived in an old house. I lived in a farmhouse when we first got married. And it was nice. After a caravan, it was vast. But after a while, you start to realise that the beams are a bit low and the rooms are a bit small. And I was glad to move out of it in the end, and we moved to a larger place. I mean, there's a thatched house next door, and the rooms are so small, it's cramped, it's not modern, it's not fit for modern life, really. I mean, it's built out of second-hand timber for a different need when people had difficulty finding any house or building a house at all because they've got no materials and no money. So they're built for different needs. Today we have sufficient affluence to be able to build a house the way we want it.
Maybe at this point I should tell you that I'm hoping to build my own house, and I don't know how much I should do myself. This is very early days, but I would like to come up with a better home. I was mentioning about just across Britain and the new houses that come up, and I often feel that they're not built to standard, but I don't know why I feel that. Is it the case that some of them
are built to standard? The houses building today, I was looking at some only last week, brand new houses they're building with about 50 mil of insulation in the walls. How that meets building regs, I do not know. But for living in, they're going to have to heat that house forever. Every winter, they're going to have to put the heating on in October and turn it off in March, using loads of energy when it doesn't. It's unnecessary.
Then how do you tell? Because I'm someone who is hoping to educate myself into a better position, but as a punter, I don't know what I'm looking at. I just get a gut feeling sometimes that this area is just cheap.
Agree. You can't tell from looking at a house. You've got to investigate what the walls are made of. You've got to somehow test how airtight it is, and you can't do that by looking at it. I can't do that by looking at it.
Well, then you just end up looking at, is the hob in the kitchen shiny?
Well, that's right. That's all you're looking at is the silly aesthetic details, which are nothing to do with the energy efficiency of the house. This is a problem. Our standards have got to be improved so you cannot build down to those levels. But building regs are so slow to keep up. And all the standard builders don't like change. They want to make their profits. This is the problem. They're lobbyists and they don't want to change.
But presumably you could do all this, still make a profit and produce something better and more lasting.
It would cost more. An energy-efficient house does cost a bit more, but only 5-10% top whack, I would say. I worked it out, the one we built was about 4.5% more expensive than a standard house would have been. So I think it's worth paying that price extra, personally, and cut their profits, if you like, by 4%. They're not going to notice that.
As I mentioned, I would like to build my own house, but I'm very much a beginner and learning as I go along. What would be the first steps that you would say to me, you need to do this, Ben, you need to blah, blah, blah?
That's a difficult one.
Or maybe if I was a client of yours.
If you're a client of ours, normally they're pretty genned up when they come to us, actually. But you've got to keep reading books. There are lots of books out there about building houses energy efficiently, generally coming from abroad, German books or Scandinavian books. I've got a couple here. There's one there, in fact. And you've just got to keep reading. And there's not that many items which you need to learn, just about insulation, really. And it's very difficult to answer that question because I've spent the last 40 years learning about these things, and it's difficult to know what you don't know.
But what proportion should I know myself? I would like to build it myself,
the more you know, the better. Because if you've got builders working for you, they won't understand. There's very few builders in this country will understand what you're talking about. So you have to know it to enforce the rules, if you like, of building energy efficient houses.
How many tradesmen are qualified and doing a good job on these type of...
None. There is no such thing, except we're the only ones, as I see it, that are really getting to grips with it, with the whole situation of energy efficiency.
So what are you basing that on?
Just by looking around. My son goes to the local squash club. There's a plumber there. He's fits solar panels on roofs. And he says they don't work, and we never don't know how to set them up. So they're never set up properly to work. So what's the point? I mean, that a plumber is spending his time putting solar panels on, taking the effort to do it, and he can't be bothered to make sure that they work properly. I mean, that's the sort of attitude we got in this country. But then we're getting back to education, which is one of my points of irritation. You go to Germany, you aspire to be in the construction industry. In this country, there's no such aspiration. You end up in the building industry because you can't do anything else, because you've done no good at school, and you just, what shall I do? I'll be a bricklayer or something. I'll go to college for a couple of days, learn a bit of bricklaying, and I'll be a bricklayer for the rest of my life. And that's what happens in Britain. Instead of having engineering backgrounds and technical backgrounds, they're coming from the wrong end of the educational spectrum.
Do you do any training yourself?
Well, no, we don't. We can't afford to. There's only 4 of us in the company, and we haven't got the sufficient funds to better do that. But I'd love to, if I could. We should have people on site learning how to put these houses together, so that we take the stress off Adam, actually, who's doing the main erections on site. And it'd be nice for other people to be learning that. They should be. But we need some funding to do that. So if we could fund people to be on site, they'd be fine.
And finally, I just wonder, is there anyone else I should speak to it can either be in planning, in landscaping, in whatever else other area I should be considering when trying to build my own home?
Talking to planning is quite an interesting issue. Of course, planners are the weirdest people on earth. I'm sorry. All our clients come to us. At EcoBuild this last year when we were there, the clients come to us and said, we've had this long battle with planning for the last 3 years. We want to build an energy efficient house and they won't let us do such and such or this and that. And everybody says the same about planners. They've got no consistency, no interest in energy efficiency. Well, I don't know what their interests are, to be honest. They seem to have a secret agenda all of their own, and nobody seems to agree with it. And we don't understand the way their mindset works.
Well, I'll pop that onto the list. I've all sorts of different areas trying to build a better house. It is my focus of the next few years. 4 years, is that a realistic target?
Yes, 4 years is fine. If you've got 4 years, you're doing quite well. Most people come and say, I want to be in by Christmas, which is the favourite phrase. Then you say, which one? 4 years' time. Planning can take 2 or 3 years. Sometimes people come to us and say, I've been in planning for 3 years, and I've gradually whittled down my plans to suit what the planners will allow me to do. And often it's a compromise, which is a pity, because people have good ideas quite often. Especially if they're from outside the construction industry. They're the best ones.
Pat, thank you very much for chatting to me today.
No, not at all. I'm glad to spread a bit of ecological interest.
Houseplanninghelp.com
So a few bits and pieces about the Passivhaus standard today. Thank you, Pat. And I like it because he's challenging me about modern architecture. And I have to say, I don't know what it is. I try to keep an open mind, but I do find myself being drawn back to historical buildings. And I know in a future episode, I must explore this. Why? What is it about the older buildings that I like? And is there any reason behind that? Do I need some therapy? But Pat is local to me, so I'm hoping at some point in the future there might be another chance to link up with him because he has all sorts of knowledge. His website, touchwoodhomes.co.uk. And Pat introduced me to the AECB. They are the Sustainable Building Association in the UK. And he said, there's loads of great information on here. Spend some time in the forums. And I really enjoyed that process, so much so that I became a member. I feel slightly guilty because it's really about people in the industry. But then I even went to the conference, and they didn't send me away or anything, but it's exactly the type of people that I want to get to know. And I was blown away mainly by how forward-facing it all was, that they were really trying to challenge themselves. How can we come up with something better for the future? Whereas I get the impression, I know I'm a newbie around here, that a lot of the construction industry just do what they know best and want to make as much money as possible. But that's certainly not the way that the AECB is. And I know at the moment they're looking for younger members. So if you are in the UK, possibly you're someone who's coming to London, I don't know, from abroad, this might work for you as well. They're looking for people in the industry already. You might have done a degree or just come out of your training, whether you're a builder or into architecture or whatever it might be that's relevant. But if you are someone who cares about a sustainable future, these are the people. You want to network with them. So it's aecb.net, aecb.net. I assure you, you will meet some very interesting people there. I'm just about done for this session. You can sign up for our email newsletter to find out about all the guests that we've got lined up, and we have got some fantastic ones. I'll tell you about my next guest, and it just goes, it's up another level now. I hope I'm not going to show myself up here, but next time on the podcast from houseplanninghelp.com, we're speaking to Dr. Wolfgang Feist. Now, he is the German physicist who set up the Passivhaus Institute in Germany, and I'll be interviewing him next time. Make sure you're here for that.
You've been listening to Ben Adam Smith on the path to build a better home. Sign up now to the free email newsletter. Head to houseplanninghelp.com.